Hi, welcome to Geometry and Graphics. In this series, we're going to learn about geometry in several different facets while using web graphics to illustrate and explore the ideas. So in this first unit, we're just going to get set up and see how to use graphics on the web. So first, we'll need to install a text editor. So VS Code is a pretty good one. So let's download and install that. Okay. That should open in a second. Okay, yes, I agree. So let it install. Right, now open this. Okay, so in VS Code, we'll create a new file and save it as index.html. Okay, so in index.html, we'll type the following. Doctype HTML, and the software will offer you a bunch of auto completions. HTML, then head, title, my first web page, and then body, H1, hello world. This is like the first program or web page or whatever everyone writes. Okay, so now to view this, we'll go into our web browser and open index.html. All right, so it tells us hello world. All right, so congratulations, you made your first web page, or not your first, then you made another one. So you might be familiar with sites like Squarespace or WordPress. We're always going to be writing code for our web pages rather than using a GUI tool. Under the hood, those tools are generating this HTML code for you. So every web page everywhere is made out of HTML. If you want to see how another site achieved a particular effect, you can see there HTML by right-clicking on the page and clicking View Page Source, or Control-U is a shortcut for that. So this might be a little overwhelming at first when you're first learning, but here you can see all the HTML that makes up this page. A lot of modern sites now don't send the HTML in this form directly. They instead use JavaScript to create the page. So if we go to like twitter.com, view source, we don't see very much stuff that looks like HTML. What you can do here is we click on here and go more tools, web developer tools. We click on the inspector. Now we can use this guy to select an element in the page. Okay, and so now here is the HTML used to make that up. And so this little debugging window lets us do a lot of things. It shows us the HTML. We can also change the styles of the page. So I do this. I can change the styles of the page. And we'll see later a little bit more how these things work. The other thing I wanted to quickly show you while I'm just sort of showing you the basic web development tools. I guess first, so let's change this to hello everybody. So when you make a change to your web page, you press refresh to see the changes. You can also use a keyboard shortcut for this, Control-R or F5. So you'll sort of get into a routine of Alt-Tab between windows and then Control-R to refresh and see your changes. Right, so the last thing I wanted to do before I switch over to the fancy interface. So we'll write a script tag. So this is a JavaScript, and inside we'll write console.log hello world. So if we refresh the page, we don't see that anywhere in the page, but in that developer console, in this console, we see the message hello world. So this console you'll use a lot to debug. So this is just a tool for you. This isn't intended for your end users. This is intended for you to log messages and sort of see what your code is doing. Okay, so that's how you make a web page on your computer. In this series, I'm going to be using some very fancy interface where you can experiment with the code yourself inside the video. So the code tab is where I'm going to be typing. If you click on the playground tab, there's another editor where you can experiment with the code yourself and modify it and see what happens. The copy button will copy whatever's currently in my buffer into yours. The run button will refresh the preview. And then I've also got a console here. The clear button will clear the console. So this isn't as powerful as the browser console and the developer tools I just showed you. Sometimes you'll need to look in that one. But for simple situations, this is easier than flipping back and forth between the video and your browser console. But then for the examples that you'll be able to download, and when you're making your own web pages, you should always be typing that into VS Code. So let's do a quick rundown of the different ingredients that go into web pages. So there's basically 3 different programming languages that get used on the web. These are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So HTML is for describing our content. In other words, sort of telling a computer some information about what it means. CSS is for styling content, so things like colors and fonts. And then JavaScript is for interactivity, or what we might call the behavior of the web page. So HTML, this is what we're writing so far, this syntax of these angle brackets. So these are called HTML tags. So li means list item, ul means unordered list. If I change this to ol, this would be for an ordered list where the order of items matters. What I'm doing here, this is called a comment. So comments don't appear in the output. They're just for explaining your code. This M here stands for emphasis. Or there's also an abbreviation tag. So like HTML stands for hypertext markup language. And so if I do this, now when you mouse over the word HTML in the preview, it'll pop up hypertext markup language. But so far, our content looks very plain. And so this is where CSS comes in. So this, if you'd like to know, stands for cascading style sheets. And so there's a few different ways to use CSS in a web page. The first way that I'll show you is we can put a style tag in the head of our page. And then, well, for starters, let's just make the font size bigger so we can see what we're doing. Then maybe I could make a sans serif font, which is more usual for the web. And instead of a bright white background, I can make this a light gray background. So CSS, although we're including it inside HTML, is its own totally separate language. So you don't see the syntax of like these angle brackets inside our CSS, but we do reference HTML tags in CSS. So this is applying these styles to the body element, and then things like font family and font size will get inherited by like all the text in the body. I could also do, if I wanted to add more spacing between these list items, I could do margin bottom 0.5 em. So em means the current font size. So as is, this is the same as writing margin bottom 12 pixels. But if I do it with 0.5 em, then this will scale as I adjust like this value. If I made this like 30, then this will be equivalent to 15 pixels. Okay, but usually we want to put CSS in its own separate file instead of mixing it in with the HTML. So I'll move all of this into style.css. And so if I do that, now our web page doesn't have any styles anymore. We have to tell it to look for the style.css file. So for this, we use a link tag in the head of the document. We use an href to tell it where to find the file. And then rel is just saying the relation of this document to the current one is that it's a style sheet. All right, and so then JavaScript then is for basically programming our web pages. So not just something static that looks pretty, but something that is interactive. So as with CSS, there's a couple ways of using JavaScript. We can put JavaScript directly in the page, like we did before with this console.log. But we can also, usually we want to put it in its own separate file. So the syntax here is a little bit different. Instead of link, we use script with a source attribute, src. Okay, so now this is including script.js. Now in script.js, maybe I'll do, so JavaScript can modify elements on the page. So here, this syntax, this document.querySelector, what I'm doing inside these quotes is a CSS type selector to say, grab an H1 element. So I could do something like element.innerHTML equals JavaScript can modify stuff on the page. I can also modify the styles. I could do element.style.color equals red. So you would use like HTML and CSS to style what you want the page to initially look like, but then you could, using JavaScript, you could modify those types of things as the user interacts with the page. So if I do, if I console.log, that's element, the in-browser, in-video console that I've got here isn't powerful enough to log this H1 element, but if you look in your browser console, developer tools, you'll see the H1 element in the console, and you can click on it, and it'll show a whole bunch of properties that it has, like you do like inner HTML, which is what we set it to here. I could .node name is H1. So it has this is a JavaScript object that you can do a whole bunch of stuff with. And I'll get into more detailed and more interesting examples, in the coming videos. Okay, so that was just a super quick rundown of the different ingredients, things that go into web pages. I'm not really going to teach you web development in this series. Like, I'll show you how to do a bunch of specific things, and you can learn a lot just by like modifying the examples in these videos. But I won't really go through and like teach you from the foundations up. But I will tell you how to teach yourself web development. How to learn web development. So I'll use an ordered list. So first, come up with a project you want to do. So this could be something like make a web page for all the cats that you meet. And then step 2 is do it. So notice there wasn't a step here where it was like spend a bunch of time learning to do stuff. I think a lot of times people, or maybe they're intimidated, but they sort of like, I want to do this, but I don't know how. You don't need to know how to do a thing before you can do the thing. You learn how to do the thing by doing the thing. So like everything I know about web development, I have learned by coming up with something I wanted to do that was one or two steps above my current knowledge or abilities, and was figuring out what I needed to get that done. You repeat that a whole bunch of times, eventually you know a lot of stuff. Maybe another thing to add in here is keep your projects. So don't delete stuff once you're finished with it. Not only do you learn from your projects, but one thing that'll happen is over time you'll build up this personal library of code that you can reuse between a lot of different things. You'll run into some problem that you had run into several, like 3 projects ago. And even though the projects are like totally different, you can copy this one bit of code to solve that problem and save yourself time. Okay, but how do you go about like learning what you need to do for the projects? Whoops. So here is a pretty good tutorial. So this, by the way, this is how we make links in the sense of like a link to another web page in HTML. Oops, let me do. So A stands for anchor, as opposed to link is something different. The href, again, is where it should link to. The text of the link is just the contents of this tag. And then this target equals blank. This is to make it so that it opens in a new tab. If you try to open this in the web page inside the video, then the video will like stop. Yeah, I would suggest split your time between tutorials and projects. So projects are maybe easier to keep yourself motivated with, but you do want to just have a firm foundation so that like you understand what each piece of syntax means. So you want a mix of building from the ground up and just diving in and making stuff that's cool. Finally, what happens if you get stuck? Use a paragraph tag. If you get stuck, the answer to everything forever and always is Google. No, really. So I like to break up programming as 40% Googling, 25% thinking, 25% swearing, and 10% typing. Although there is some overlap between Googling and swearing, so maybe the chart should look something more like this. But I've been coding for a very long time, and this chart is still accurate for me. At least 40% of my time coding is just spent looking stuff up on Google, reading manuals for different things. And so learning how to Google, like when an error message pops up, you copy that error message into Google. Learning how to Google is a really important part of learning software development and learning how to program. Okay, so great. Getting started, hopefully. And in the next videos, we'll jump into some more cool examples.